Hello and welcome to the Deep Sea podcast, Pressurised, a short, punchy version of our main feed that gets right to the scientific point. If you like what you hear and you'd like to hear the full episode, you can find it in the same feed. And now, to get right to the point.
A team on the Schmidt Ocean Institute vessel Falkor 2 were out in Antarctica exploring, like they like to do, when rather conveniently a huge piece of the ice shelf broke off and moved politely out the way, nice and quick. That allowed them to get their eyeballs on some pristine under ice habitat. There have been a few studies along these lines in the past, but they've usually been, it takes a long time to organize a trip to the Antarctic. So they've been sort of a year later. So there's always that worry of like, is this how it would look or has it already started to change? And so within a few days of the shelf breaking away, they were able to get the ROV Sebastian down there and get their eyes on it. And I was in the room. And so that will be our interview for this episode. It's all pretty fresh. The press release only came out a few days ago. I'm lucky enough to be joined by and reunited with, really, because we've all spent a lot of time at sea together, Patricia Esquete, assistant researcher at the biology department at the Centre of Marine and Environmental Studies in the University of Aveiro, Portugal. And she's a benthic ecologist and taxonomist, and her research interests include benthic biodiversity and the biogeography and ecological drivers in the deep sea. And Sasha Montelli is a lecturer in environmental change at the University College London, and his research combines marine geophysical data with sediment cores and numerical modelling to reconstruct past interactions between ice sheets, oceans, and the solid Earth. And you two were both principal investigators, which means boss scientists on our recent expedition. So thanks so much for dropping in for a chat.
Thanks
for having us.
We've just come off a meeting where we're planning some of the outputs, and it's nice to be reunited, really, after spending 5 weeks all together. Rapid fire friendship. I feel like you get years of friendship in.
That's right. It's always very special to find your friends again in the first meetings after a cruise.
How have you rejoined society? Because I'm having a bit of a hard time. I didn't realize how strange I'd gone.
Yeah, abruptly. I don't think I'm already back, completely back. My mind is somehow still between those ice shelves and icebergs.
I keep saying that I'm back in body, but yeah, the mind isn't there yet.
Totally.
But especially when you keep working with and thinking about the science and the data, you still kind of have glimpses of the images that in front of you and the scenery and so on. So
you're still there.
It's very much present still.
Talking about ocean, talking about the ice, talking about the ecosystem, seeing the same people. So then coming back is always very abrupt.
And I'm sure, like me, everything that you'd been avoiding was waiting for you. My emails were horrible. There was so much I'd put off. And yeah, I've got to do it now. So let's have a chat about our expedition. We came together to plan what would eventually become this cruise.
3 years? 2 years?
I think learned about Schmidt Ocean and about this opportunity, and that they're calling for proposals to go to Southeastern Pacific 2 years ago. So I submitted, I remember clearly, just under 2 years ago.
It took longer than we expected to actually have the cruise because we made the proposal for 2024.
Our sort of biology side of things at least came together through the Challenger 150 and sort of the deep sea community. And I remember we were talking about this for a long time.
Yeah, we've been talking about that for a long time. That's true. In Challenger 150.
So we finally all came together, and it was actually the combination of multiple projects.
From my standpoint of view, it was my proposal and Patricia's, and two proposals that were merged. But before that, I don't know how it was on Patricia's side. How many proposals?
Yeah, it's a little bit more complicated because it's more like one proposal then became split into two, and one of those children proposals was merged with Sasha's proposal. So basically we had an idea of a cruise that will go from the south of Chile to the Antarctica. So the Antarctica will be the second leg. That was divided into two, and the second part was merged with Sasha's proposal. So basically this one merged proposal in the Bellinghausen Sea, like a baby of two proposals, half or one proposal and a half, I will say.
Yeah, one biological, and then my proposal was mostly geological, paleoceanographical, paleoglaciological, so mostly reconstructing past environments without biology in it. So it all ended up really nicely in terms of its interdisciplinarity.
I started to feel that was a real strength of the project. And I really enjoyed those little meetings we'd have at the end of the day where we don't usually have that much context. We don't usually have that much interdisciplinarity on these cruises. So, somebody would make an observation and then somebody would chime in from a totally different field and just say, oh, well, that explains this, or that might be influenced by this. And it feels like the science moved very quickly because of that variety we had in the room. That
made this particular cruise really amazing. Because very often you talk about multidisciplinary cruises, multidisciplinary projects, but in reality, that will be a biology-focused cruise with some input from mapping or from geomorphology or something, or all the way around. You have a geology cruise, for instance, or a physical oceanography cruise with some inputs from biology or from fauna. But this one, I feel that was one of these very rare cases in which we were actually discussing together to see the full picture. It was really, really fun at the end of the day, just talk to each other and kind of have this complete overview of what we've been seeing during the day.
As you say, Patricia, the interdisciplinarity in this case is not far-fetched or contrived. It actually was the case where all the pieces of the system that we studied using different methodologies, different expertise really fall into place to amalgamate in one big, wholesome picture where, you have ocean that is influenced by ice and seafloor, which we all need to understand separately using our own methodology, but then all of them, it sets out the context for how we see these communities thrive and why we see them and how nutrients are potentially being delivered, what are their trajectories via circulation. So it's really generally interdisciplinary.
And I think we all learned a lot from each other, which is also an added value.
Expanding your own sort of scientific consciousness in a way, which is great.
Yeah, I really like that way of putting it. Expanding your scientific consciousness. I'm going to write that down.
Yeah, that's good. Sort of as things started off, because as ever, working in polar regions, you never quite know what you're going to get. We had a fairly sort of tight plan of what we wanted to do. We had a few contingencies and a few backups. We knew we wouldn't likely be able to do all the things we wanted. I think really as we're sort of changing over with the previous expedition, there was talk of there is a lot of ice this year. Oh, yeah. And we had an ice pilot on board and we were sort of looking at the maps each day. And I know even as we're approaching, we are sort of tweaking and it's just oh, now it's moved and this site is unlocked and now it's moved and this site is unlocked. It was a lot of intense cruise planning before we'd even got there it felt like a computer game as these different pieces were opening up. There was one occasion at least when the site was opened up, but we couldn't see a path through the ice to get to it.
Right. That was actually quite, quite exciting and quite fun in a way, as you're saying. But at the same time, the cruise that we were planning or that I was envisioning months ago and what we ended up doing are completely different things. And I cannot tell. The plan that we had at the beginning was a very good plan. What we ended up doing is even better. So no complaints, but there were moments of really concern of how will that come out. It was very fun, waking up every day, not really knowing where we would be able to go.
Yeah, but I think we did quite well in a sense of strategic meta planning.
That's another good phrase. Strategic meta planning.
Yeah, but by default, just having a mindset of being very flexible. And I think we discussed that even before the cruise. So we knew that in polar environments, it can be very unpredictable. So I think it was a metaphor of, Lego bricks. And you don't know exactly what kind of castle you'll assemble, but some sort of castle will be assembled ultimately. So just because we had individual bricks, namely the tools we had, the methods, the expertise. It's just the question of where exactly we can implement them and how smart we can be in terms of strategically which sites we choose based on what's available. So I think it all lined up very, very nicely.
That's right.
Yeah, I would say if you gave me, in my subjective opinion, you gave me a choice between the plan or one of the plans that we initially had to the expedition and then what we actually did, I think I would go with the latter, to be honest.
100%. That's 100%.
Yeah. Which rarely is the case.
Yeah, and I think one word that can describe our attitude or our better skills in the field this time, or at sea this time, was flexibility. Because we changed the plan by the day, by the hour, and by the minute. And that's not an overstatement. We were changing the plans by the minute.
I don't think you two slept for the whole time. I didn't envy it at all. Like I like that you say it was exciting because you guys never got a break because it was changing so rapidly. As soon as you went to sleep, something would happen and we'd need a decision.
I admit I forced myself to sleep several times in several occasions because otherwise you know that you cannot make good decisions if you don't sleep. So I really had to force myself to go to sleep in several times.
And that flexibility, that really paid off for us. Sasha, maybe if you could talk us through what happened while we were out there and what opportunity that gave us.
So we went into this bay called Ron Entrance, which is essentially fringed by 3 separate ice shelves. And ice shelves are floating fringes, continuations of the ice that is grounded in the continent. And then as ice flows and thins, it reaches waters. At some point it reaches buoyancy point and flotation starts floating. So you have this sort of extensions of massive walls, of, a couple of hundreds meters thick. So that those are the ice shelf systems that we wanted to look at. And then one of the ice shelves, I think it was the second one we got to, Bach ice shelf, I think. Once we were in the middle of our investigations there, we were also in parallel tracking the situation in terms of sea ice and icebergs because it's a hazard. So we need to be aware of that in the area. And then we saw from the satellite imagery that there was certainly a rift propagating through one of the ice shelves. At some point we saw it calve, and then next day we saw it not only calve, but also drift away very rapidly. And so what essentially it meant is that we had a opportunity to go and do our surveys in the area that was formerly occupied by this large ice shelf, or the chunk of ice shelf that carved off in the form of iceberg, a couple of 100 square kilometers, like really 3 times the size of Paris or something like that. So we just decided that it would be really worth to finish as soon as possible of Bach ice shelf and go to that site.
Some of the estimates vary, like everything from 510 square kilometers to sort of 350, but either way, very, very big.
Very big ice shelf, yeah.
About 150 meters thick, and it had probably been there for centuries. Is that fair enough to say?
Yes, ice constantly flows as it thins and it constantly calves icebergs. But the fact that ice shelf, maybe not that very chunk of ice, because that chunk of ice at some point early in history, it all came from land, right? So it was all initially actually at some point was precipitated, accumulated on land in Antarctica somewhere further upstream. But the point is that the fact that the ice shelf itself really existed there for centuries, and then before that, actually, it was not just an ice shelf, it was much thicker to the extent that it was actually grounded. So it was an ice stream that was in touch with the seafloor. So you can imagine several times the time lapse over thousands of years. You can imagine ice that covers the whole area completely, whole base covered by ice that is grounded in touch with the seafloor. And then as climate gets warmer, ice thins and retreats to the point that it actually becomes an ice shelf there. And then that ice shelf thins and retreats to the point that we actually get there. And then we see another sort of stage of its retreat and the iceberg carving. So yeah, there's the series of events on a long time scale that happened before that. But yes, it was covered first by grounded ice and then by an ice shelf for centuries, if not thousands of years. And then finally we are here.
It was difficult to get our sort of heads around it because it's 150 meters thick, but there is ocean underneath it. And we know that there are communities living down there, but we've only really got glimpses of it before. We were right there. We were so lucky to be in close proximity. There's been similar studies in the past, but it takes ages to organize an Antarctic expedition. So they've usually been, I think the quickest was sort of a year later, and there's always a little bit of a doubt things have started to change.
I believe that after the Larsen ice shelf calved, they only were able to make it there, about 1 year ago after. There's been some other studies in which they have drill holes in the ice shelf and drop cameras. Those studies are a little bit different because first of all, they only have a single spot where they can drop the camera and look around, and that's all you have. That's all you got. Also, the depths they were working in were a lot shallower. We've been working from almost 2,000 meters up to 300 meters. The other studies have been way shallower in those drilling experiences. So yeah, we had the opportunity to actually have a comprehensive study of the whole ecosystems in higher depth. And that was really unique.
And we had a vehicle. We could go exploring. We could go and look at spots.
And we can
pick
go and
things up.
sample.
Yeah. Fantastic opportunity.
Such comprehensive studies where you can have such detailed visual characterization of the ecosystems and direct sampling of sediment and ocean waters are really, really absent, really, I think.
Yeah.
Because obviously ice shelves are extremely remote and difficult to access to logistically. Even if you had some sort of ability to get your remotely operated vehicle under an ice shelf, just it would be limited by the length of the cable, let alone probably nobody would even do that because it's extremely expensive pieces of equipment. And we know of the cases where this kind of vehicles been lost under, not even under ice shelves, but even under thinner sea ice flows. So yeah, it's really an extremely fortunate moment that it's like a gift, really, because you cannot plan those. You cannot, first of all, you cannot plan the iceberg calving, exactly the timing of it, and second, even if it calves, you don't know whether it drifts away rapidly like it did in our case, or it just might just stick around, right? So everything we're just really lucky that it all happened, and timing was perfect, and you cannot just possibly predict that and plan that. So if you write a proposal saying, oh, there's an iceberg that is likely to calve, it's never going to get funded.
Not only that, but also all that great comprehensive study that we had planned of the whole Bellingshausen Sea. Because of the ice coverage, we found ourselves confined to the run entrance, and we decided to sample in front of the ice shelves already. So that's why we were like right in front of that. What were the odds?
And the team you had assembled as well, you had the perfect suite of scientists and tools to explore this.
That was selected. The team was put together with a long time, and that's not luck. I think good luck and was, of course, a very important factor in the whole story, but you also need to take into account that we were kind of in a way ready for that.
I think even the first two ice shelves that we mapped, first of all, again, first time we mapped it before, because those ice shelves also were much more extensive in the recent past. You can see it from satellite imagery. So in a way, we already explored sort of sub-ice shelf community that were exposed just on a longer time scale, from years to decades. But I think that already was really exciting once we were doing this. So that already was really powerful and beyond expectations. But then the iceberg presented just incredible opportunity.
Part of the sort of flip side of having access to this area that no one has had access to before is it is a blank slate. So the very first thing we needed to do is actually figure out the terrain down there and start to plan our dives. So the first step was actually to map this totally new area.
Because we were already planning to go to places that had not been explored before. We would just keep going with the same plan, but just in this new open area.
The same routine and sequence of operations, which worked really well. You would expect from the adjacent areas that we would see this bedrock, essentially the mountains, the hard stiff rock sticking out, over deepen, so deeper towards the shelf and a bit shallower towards the sea. But I think in that particular area it was really pronounced sort of mountain range, almost of amplitudes of over a kilometer in depth, with very, very steep slopes, like cliffs. You can imagine going some national parks and seeing these very magnificent cliffs. It's the same thing we mapped, but it was just underwater.
All that you're describing actually allowed a lot of different habitats, so a lot of different ecosystems and faunas.
Once we had our maps, we started to plan some dives, which were always quite nice collaborative experiences. And again, because of the technology available there, usually you've got to wait a little bit of time to sort of have high resolution maps to work with. But the data was so clean that your team, Sasha, was getting really high quality maps to us within a few hours of completing the survey.
Yes, usually when you have a high heave, beach roll, and so when there are strong waves, you have these artifacts on your imagery, acoustic imagery. Here we really were lucky. The surface was, if not mirror, then close to it. Very, very little disturbance, and so the raw data was already of very high quality. So we were really lucky in the sense that we didn't need to process it that much. Yeah, and then also from multi-beam, from the acoustic imaging, we also on the way, of course, did imaging of the ocean circulation, ocean patterns, using another acoustic profile called Doppler profile, which allows us to say basically what kind of circulation is there, where it flows, and roughly at which velocities water flows, and that's really important part of the whole. ocean circulation is structured and how it might be modulated and steered by topography, because then ultimately the circulation is the crucial part, crucial agents of that delivery of nutrients and sediment.
Came together, we sort of started planning the dives. Then we got eyes on. We were the first humans to see this space. What were your initial sort of thoughts?
I remember very clearly my first impression, because we had these shifts, right, on the watches, different watches for ROV dives. And I think even my birthday or day after, well, not a present, but it was my first shift in that area, basically. That's when we arrived. And I remember Patricia and I were on the same watch, and we went there. And usually you have the, descent of ROV, usually go through water column. You can see sometimes exciting stuff, but it's just water column, right? So it's just briefly sort of fleeting organisms just passing by. And then you start usually descend, land on the seafloor, and typically it can be quite, there's some life usually, but not as exciting, just sediment or just outcrop. But in our case, I think it was just immediately by landing, we see this sort of hanging gardens of corals of this remarkable pastel colors ranging from purple to orange to white, and it's just absolutely breathtaking.
Yeah, I think I wouldn't have described it better.
I think that's the first thing that struck the biology sort of contingent, was these really mature, established communities of things that we know are very long-lived. It's deep sea, so you never really go ashore, but we saw some huge glass sponges, we saw some huge corals, and an indication that this is a community that has existed for a long time.
Because of those previous studies that we were talking earlier, we knew that there was some life down there, but we were expecting something quite impoverished. Other studies, other reports report some fish, sponges, but something so diverse in all sense of the word. So diverse in the functional diversity and morphologies and species and everything that was quite unexpected. Until we have the numbers, we will not know, but it looked like as diverse and as rich as any other ecosystem we had been studying until then in the surrounding areas. That was beautiful to see.
And the sort of second thing that hit us was obviously this community is being supported, and there's signs of organic matter on the seabed. And the classic model of a deep sea ecosystem, especially these type of ecosystems, is the marine snow falls down from above, and that's what feeds the community. But there is no falling down from above at this site.
Exactly. So food needs to come. If it doesn't come from the surface, it comes from somewhere else. And that's one of the most exciting research questions that we have now, and we have to keep digging into, which is where all this food coming from? How does it work? How these ecosystems are fed and from where? And is it happening in other ice shelves? So this is unique of this one. And then more importantly, what's going to happen from now on? So we all know that unfortunately the Antarctica is losing ice and losing more ice every year. So this kind of events will keep happening. So the question is, what's going to happen after one ecosystem that is under the ice gets uncovered, especially this one that was particularly diverse and, as you said, as you really well described, so mature. What's going to happen now?
This site provides really good opportunity for future cruises if conditions allow, and I don't think ice shelves are going to be advanced there. They're probably going to be retreat looking at the trends over the last decades, because we know exactly where we did the dives, the exact trajectories. It would be quite interesting to come back in a couple of years and see how it changed over this couple of years since the conditions on the surface changed quite dramatically. Does it really matter? Or is it just this sort of lateral transport, horizontal circulation by oceans, primary effect on transport of the nutrients, and that allows the ecosystem to thrive? That would be really interesting sort of experiment.
Yeah, we were there at time zero and the positioning is so accurate.
Yes.
We could go back and see these individual sponges, not just a sort of an idea of the habitat, but you can go back to these particular boulders.
Absolutely.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
Yeah, we definitely have to come back.
We got some different sort of characters to the communities, and it was pretty much what we'd seen out in the other areas as well. We'd have these large sedimentary areas where you tend to get your deposit feeders. That's where you get the sort of sea cucumbers and things grazing off the seabed. And then whenever there's a hard substrate, you have these sort of filter feeding communities, things that have feeding appendages that they want to sort of get up into the water. So you got the sea anemones and things like that. There's two very distinct flavors, or at least it felt to me. Were there any other nuances to the community that jumped out to you?
For me, what was really really interesting to see. And yet one more indicator of how mature the community is that, for instance, if you have a coral, it was a coral that had several different species living on the coral and interacting in the coral. For instance, you had polychaetes, you had isopods, the whole populations of isopods in a single coral, actually, and sea stars. That's not an indication of the maturity of the ecosystem. You have several species occupying the same space, occupying the same niche. In a not so established ecosystem, you can expect just the coral or just the coral with one species living on it. If you have that many species occupying different functionality and occupying the same space, that's already an indicator of maturity of the ecosystem. The diversity was really spectacular. Even every single sponge, we could see several species of amphipods in a single sponge.
And they're probably highly specialized. If it's not at the species level, it's probably at the genus level that amphipod and that sponge is a set. and like you say, that indicates a mature community. It's not just this long-lived thing that's managed to grow so big. It's this complexity that has arisen. It was fun peeking into the glass sponges because we'd quite often angle the ROV camera down into it and you'd be greeted by a load of shrimp looking back out at you.
Exactly. Very, very, very fun. I cannot wait to actually go through the samples, identify the species, and find out what species are to be described. We know that we will find several new species. That's something very frequent when you explore a new area in the deep sea. You find species that don't have a name.
We wanted to share the results fairly quickly, or at least share that, we've had this incredible opportunity, but there's going to be a long tail to this, isn't there? There's so much data that we can pick through from the cores and from the species samples, and even just going through all that video data. There's a lot to mine out of this.
Yeah, and combinations between different data sets and the synergies. Yeah, we can in the future be quite imaginative and creative about how one can inform the other and so on. So yeah, it's great to have this diverse and high quality data set.
It's going to be very exciting.
There's whole PhDs that are going to be built on this, a wealth that we can pick through for quite a long period of time. I know I just got the fish back the other week and they're nicely going through stepping and they're just, they look amazing. So I'm very excited to start. We also had the fairly unique opportunity. This is something that's only really existed in the last few years, it feels, and something that I know Schmidt really pushed forward on is we could take people at home with us on this first site of this under ice area. So, we're the very first humans to lay eyes on it, but we shared that with only a couple of seconds delay. People sitting at their desks are seeing this for the first time as well. Was this your first experience with dive streaming?
It was for me.
For me too, yeah. It was incredible to see such a dedicated community. You see how involved they are. I was really surprised. I had no idea about this. Citizen science in action, and how fascinated people are, how interested they are. Sometimes seem to identify some life. Well, certainly better than I, because I'm not a biologist. But it's impressive sometimes, the breadth of knowledge.
Yeah, they really drive science. They provide a huge service because we're just working our shifts. We don't always see what's on the other parts, or we're just like, I know there was something cool on that one. I'll have to dig back through the video and pick that out. And then on Blue Sky or social media, somebody has a screen grab and they've tagged you in it, and they've tagged another expert and sort of started the discussion happening. And a fair few scientists joined us as well. There was quite a few names I recognized in the feed, and it's wider than the vessel. It feels like we'd extended beyond it. I feel there's been a shift in the public. I feel people are genuinely interested, and there's almost a pressure on the journalists now to report science better. The community, or at least the people who are interested in it, are so well informed, just like our citizen scientists, they're so knowledgeable. You can't make it clickbaity. You can't make it superficial. I mean, those still happen, but they've got a bigger demand on journalists, and that means probably you're having much more intense interviews than you would have done 10 years ago.
Yeah,
that's a good sign, and especially for the deep ocean, because indeed we were working in deep sea. That's been long forgotten for a long time. I feel that it didn't get the attention it deserves, taking into account that it's such a big chunk of our planet, and people just care about whales, sharks, and coral reefs. And now I feel that deep sea is getting a lot of attention, which is a good thing, or the attention it deserves. And that's a good thing.
Well, with all the busy media stuff, thank you so much for taking the time and coming on to have a chat with me. Lots more to report. This is early findings. This is the first press release, and we'll be sure to have updates as things are revealed. But for now, thank you so much for coming on for a chat.
Oh, thanks to you.
Yeah, been great pleasure. Thank you for having us, Thom.
I have some thoughts on this ice thing. If one was being preyed upon by air-breathing animals, being under, and you were not one, that would be good, right?
Very.
So if you're getting trashed by whales or penguins or seals or whatever it is, if you can get right under the ice, they just can't, because they won't be able to stay down long enough before they have to go and take a breath.
Absolutely.
Then I was thinking, wouldn't it be weird? There must be instances where a whale, for example, goes under the ice, doesn't realize the extent of ice, and then dies.
And drowns.
And then ends up, the whale fall is on the ceiling.
Ooh, that's weird.
Yeah.
I like that.
It must, right? Surely there must have been cases where, it's got disorientated or whatever it is, or it's gone too far and couldn't get back out for the next breath. And it's just...
You find loads of sea turtle bones in caves because they go into sea caves and get lost. I don't know how common it is, but the hydrography in the area was really unusual because it was quite a, nourished seabed, basically. You could still see loads of marine snow, but it was coming in laterally. And there's a bay on the other side. That might have been Marguerite Bay. That's where the water's coming from, and it's being pushed down. And then it's running under this ice shelf and popping up again in this bay. But that was the interesting thing. And I was wondering whether, because that's surface water being driven down. So all that phytoplankton is essentially being killed and sunk because the ice shelf was like 150 meters. And that's probably, if you push a buoyant piece of phytoplankton down 150 meters, that's probably enough to make it sink, to break whatever buoyancy it's got going on. And so it might actually be enriching this whole environment, even though it was locked under the ice and sort of separate from that directly down marine snow. It's got this like murder conveyor belt, which is sinking phytoplankton for it. That's my thoughts, at least.
Good thoughts.
Some good thoughts. Just thoughts for now, though. Because the other thing that really annoyed me is that it turns out that the fish nests weren't under there. I had to go and look back at the data, but they were further out from the shelf. But like you say about avoiding air-breathing predators, like the seals that snuffle up the ice fish pretty good. But if you were nesting under the ice shelf...
It's a great place to be.
And that was a pressurized version of one of our longer podcast episodes. If you enjoyed that and you would like to hear the full length episode, just match the episode numbers and you'll be able to find the full length version in the feed. Thanks for listening. We'll deep see you next time, and I abyss you already.